Okay, so Kevin, I've heard Feige, I've heard Feige, however you pronounce his last name, person which ends up being the president of Marvel Studios, recently made mention that he doesn't quite understand why there hasn't been more female comic book characters in large movies. And of course, I've only heard bits and pieces of his interview. Some people cast it in a much more negative light. Well, it's like, well, we don't have time for, some of the female characters to get main movies. But Ant-Man will get a movie. Now, Black Widow, Ant-Man. A Lady Sif movie could work pretty solid as well, but we get an Ant-Man movie instead. And he, of course, mentioned that you could easily cherry-pick films that had female leads and did poorly. And you could look at something kind of like the Resident Evil franchise. It makes money, but it's not a well-recognized series. Aeon Flux, Ultraviolet. So you can pick an awful Catwoman. You could probably do that all day long and pick movies that were female-led. Mortal Instruments, City of Bones. Or Haywire. That really didn't make a tremendous amount of money. At the same time, you can point at ones that had female leads that actually made money. Divergent, made a profit, not a great profit. Hunger Games. Okay, made a tremendous amount of money. You can even say Twilight. If you want to go as far as say that it has a female lead character. You might notice all of those are young adult-based novels, so that they have a much larger fan base, and it's easier to get those films to work relatively well. And they also have pre-established storylines, a basic idea of what it is you're going to do with the characters, as well as have really solid ensemble casting normally. He also threw out Frozen. I don't think you really could include a cartoon. Because if you want to say that Frozen did well, then The Incredibles did well. If The Incredibles did well, then Fantastic Four movie should be a knockout. It should be just the easiest thing to do in the world. And we've had two that didn't meet the success of The Incredibles. Both did well. So therefore a Crypto movie would do phenomenal. And it's weird because somebody who is the president of a studio who comes out and says, yeah, I don't know why there aren't more female comic book movies. If you're one of the head decision makers at a place that makes comic book movies and you can't figure out why there haven't been more female comic book movies, I think you might need to be a little bit more honest and probably say, in a lot of ways, the financials just aren't there. But you don't want to say that because then people are going to attack you maliciously. When the first Avengers came out, Joss Whedon had mentioned, he's like, the Justice League movie could potentially have a less monochromatic cast. Which was odd because in Iron Man 2, they specifically did make mention that they didn't want Tony Stark in the Avengers. It would have been quite simple to have said, we don't want Tony Stark, we want Iron Man. You probably could have pretty easily sprinkled in, if only there had been a non-white guy who could have filled in every now and then for Iron Man. Man, if only they had some guy who was in an Iron Man-like suit who wasn't a white. Man, if only they had some guy in a machine to help fight that war. Oh, they did. They introduced War Machine, but didn't use him in the Avengers film. You might notice when you see shots of Avengers 2, all of a sudden you've got Falcon in there, you've got War Machine. You could have put War Machine in the first Avengers and it would have been fine. No reason why you couldn't unless it ends up being a contractual obligation and you wanted to use them in later films. And Avengers 2 will also have Scarlet Witch, which will bring up their total of female characters to 2. 2. They have made mention that a Black Widow movie is not on the horizon at all. But Ant-Man is. Now, hopefully when they do Ant-Man, they'll focus a lot on Janet. If they do that, then also when Avengers 3 roll around, you could potentially have 3 women in it. And ironically, 2 of them are pretty good replacements for the male characters. You really don't need Hawkeye, per se, if you've got Black Widow. Black Widow can do a lot of what Hawkeye can do. So that's okay. You really don't need him as Ant-Man when you have Janet as Wasp. you've got the ability to kind of transition certain characters out and get you that much more diverse group that you really wanted. So I started thinking, well, what other characters would have been great to have seen done in an actual movie that would have been very interesting? And I'm going to say this, I still think that Heroes for Hire would have been a fantastic movie to have done. It would have been Guardians of the Galaxies, but set in New York. Now, I know most people saying, but it's going to be a Netflix thing. I don't have a tremendous amount of faith for what Marvel can do when it comes to a television series. If you think that I'm joking, Marvel Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Deathlock. They absolutely butchered the character of Deathlock in that show. So the same people who are working on that, I don't know how well they're going to do Luke Cage. Awesome character. If you want somebody who could take the place of Captain America, you would have Falcon and you have Luke Cage. Luke Cage would be a fantastic. Just picture the scene of taking. I'm trying to think who would have been a great actor for that. If he would have been younger, like Michael J. White would be a phenomenal character to be Luke Cage. I think he's a little bit on the older side. But could you imagine that scene where you've got Luke Cage, a guy wrongly accused in prison, undergoing essentially a super soldier experiment, and then having Samuel L. Jackson walking in, the conversation those two could have. Samuel L. Jackson and his Nick Fury persona describing about, yeah, you've been wronged, you've been put in this situation, however, you can rage against the machine, or you can come work with us. If you can work with us, every single person who said you weren't good enough, you weren't smart enough, you will prove them all wrong. And could you imagine the reaction that he would have had when Luke Cage was one of the people who helped defeat an alien invasion, or helped defeat Ultron, and simply helped save the world? Somebody who was discredited predominantly because of where he grew up is now this monumental character, and how huge that actually would be. Instead, he's going to be on the Netflix show. At the same time, Iron Fist had an interracial relationship back when that was really, really taboo, with a woman who was a cybernetic arm. Try and tell me that Misty Knight would not be an awesome character to see on a TV show? Or not a TV show, see on a big screen? That you couldn't have worked some of those scenarios and they would have been perfect? Because all of a sudden you're hitting the multiple notes that they're trying to hit. You would have had someone who was female. Ironically, she would essentially almost be considered not quite a female version of Winter Soldier, but you'd have somebody who would have that sort of presence, but also has a tremendous amount of martial arts background. Now, she could very easily help kind of fill your spot a little bit of Black Widow with Scarlett Johansson being pregnant. She's someone who's got a detective background. She might not have the advanced military background, but she has enough that you can put her kind of in that sort of espionage investigative role. So they've got all these characters at their disposal they could pick from. I mean, I think technically they have legal use of Spider-Woman, which would be a tremendous character to try to use. They also have, I think they still have legal rights to the Inhumans, which would be a tremendous group to try to get going. There's so many women that they could pick from, and they haven't. But when they're asked, they're like, yeah, we can't figure out why. If you want to just come out and say, the financials just aren't there currently. If you want to say that's the reason why, a bunch of the people at Marvel have decided, we've got a bunch of female characters. We don't quite know how to portray them, so instead we'll kind of put one in a movie. If you think about it, Scarlett Johansson's she's been their female lead character. You got Iron Man 2, you got Captain America 2, Avengers. I mean, she's been in a lot of them. Would a Lady Sif movie work well? Yes. You've already got set pieces. People already kind of want to see the character. Let's be honest, if a Lady Sif movie comes out and it's good, that puts a lot of pressure on DC to make a better Wonder Woman film. I mean, there's a lot of direction that they actually can go with lots of these characters, and the fact that they haven't just seems really weird to come out and be like, yeah, we don't know why we haven't done some of these things. We don't have any of them on the horizon. Doctor Strange they have on the horizon, so hopefully they'll have, I think Clea was his wife, who would have been essentially a female sorcerer, or sorceress, which would be interesting to see. They've got a ton of characters at their disposal. You have the ones they've already introduced, ones that get very easily introduced, but the fact that they haven't is sad. And then whenever they're asked, it's like, well, we want to throw in more black superheroes or more female superheroes. We just haven't gotten around to doing it yet. Even though they've got characters at the ready that they can use, that'd be very simple to go with.